I've always loved camping. There's something about the quiet solitude of nature, the crisp night air, and the glow of a campfire that makes me feel at peace. But after what happened 2 years ago, I don't think I'll ever camp alone again. It was late September, right at the beginning of the off-season for most national parks. I had planned a solo camping trip deep in the Oregon wilderness, far from the crowded trails and family-friendly sites. I wanted true isolation, just me, the trees, and the night sky. The drive to my destination took nearly 6 hours, winding through dense forests with almost no cell service. By the time I reached the small remote parking lot at the trailhead, the sun was already dipping low. I had about an hour of daylight left to set up my camp, so I moved quickly. I hiked about 3 miles in before finding the perfect spot, a small clearing near a stream, surrounded by thick trees. It was completely silent apart from the occasional chirp of crickets and rustling leaves. I set up my tent, started a fire, and cooked myself a simple meal. As darkness settled, I stretched out in my camping chair, watching the flames dance. The quiet was comforting at first, but the deeper the night got, the more unsettling it became. There were no distant sounds of other campers, no passing hikers, just me. I was halfway through a book when I heard it, a single snap of a twig. I froze, straining my ears. Nothing, probably just an animal. I shook it off and continued reading, but the hairs on my arms stayed raised. Minutes passed, then another sound, a slow, deliberate step in the brush. It wasn't the scurrying of a small animal, it was weighty, purposeful. I switched off my lantern, plunging my campsite into near darkness, except for the flickering fire. My eyes adjusted, scanning the tree line. And then, I saw it. Just beyond the reach of my firelight, a tall shadow stood between the trees, not moving, just watching. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the light, but then the shadow shifted slightly, the shape of a person. A cold sweat broke over me. "Hello?" My voice barely carried over the crackling fire. No response. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it at the figure. But the moment the beam hit the trees, nothing. No one was there. I exhaled sharply, my pulse hammering. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe exhaustion and the eerie silence were playing tricks on me. I forced myself to sit back down, convincing myself I was overreacting. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. After a while, I decided to turn in for the night. I doused the fire, leaving only the glow of my lantern inside the tent. The nylon walls felt paper-thin as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, every little sound amplifying in my ears. And then, soft footsteps, not coming from the woods, coming from right outside my tent. I held my breath. My entire body was locked in place, listening. The steps stopped. I slowly reached for the knife I kept beside my sleeping bag, gripping it tight. Then the fabric of my tent shifted slightly. A hand, a finger. Something was brushing against it. My heart was a thunderstorm in my chest. I wanted to scream, to burst out of the tent, to do something. But just as suddenly as it started, the presence outside withdrew. I waited, straining to hear any movement, but there was only silence. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to peek outside. Nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone. Just the empty woods. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my tent, knife in hand, waiting for the first light of dawn. As soon as the sun crept over the horizon, I packed up my gear faster than I ever had in my life and hiked back to my car without stopping. I told myself it had been an animal, that my imagination had filled in the rest. But deep down, I knew better. Because when I got home, exhausted and relieved, I checked my phone. A single text message from an unknown number. Nice campsite. I haven't been camping alone since. I used to think the scariest part of camping was the wildlife. Bears, mountain lions, maybe a pack of wolves. But after what happened last summer, I know better. It's not the animals you should be afraid of. It's what hides in the dark. My best friend Danny and I had planned a weekend camping trip in a remote part of Montana. No designated campsites, no ranger stations nearby, just miles and miles of untamed wilderness. It was exactly what we wanted. We hiked for most of the day, finally setting up camp on a plateau overlooking a valley. It was beautiful, untouched, and completely silent. Too silent. At first, we didn't think much of it. No birds, no rustling. Just an eerie stillness that settled in as the sun disappeared behind the trees. We built a fire, cooked some food, and started drinking. It wasn't until close to midnight, when we were both lying back on our sleeping bags, that we heard the first sound. A whistle, high-pitched, distant, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. We both sat up immediately, exchanging glances. "Did you hear that?" Danny whispered. I nodded, suddenly very sober. The sound had been faint but clear. Not a bird, not the wind, a human whistle. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the trees, but there was nothing. Just darkness. I tried to shake it off. Maybe another hiker was out there. Then we heard it again. This time closer. My skin crawled. We weren't near any trails. The odds of someone else being out here, especially this late, were slim. Danny, always the brave one, called out, "Hello?" Silence. Then a response. A single long whistle, like someone was answering him. I felt my stomach drop. "Dude, turn off the fire," I whispered. Danny hesitated but did as I said. We sat there in the darkness, listening. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then, footsteps. Not just one person, multiple. The sound of twigs snapping, leaves crunching. Slow, deliberate steps coming from different directions, surrounding us. I grabbed my knife. Danny did the same. We sat there, gripping our weapons, waiting. The footsteps stopped. The forest was deathly silent again. Then a voice, low, gruff, right behind us. "Camping out here alone?" We spun around, but no one was there. I don't remember much after that, just the sheer, mind-numbing terror that overtook me. We grabbed our gear, shoving whatever we could into our packs, and bolted. We didn't bother packing up the tent. We just ran. We ran through the dark forest, tripping over roots, our flashlights bouncing wildly. Behind us, we could hear them. Footsteps, running, chasing, whistling. At one point, Danny tripped. I hauled him up, adrenaline giving me the strength of 10 men. We didn't stop. We kept going, pushing through branches, lungs burning, hearts ready to explode. And then, silence. We stopped, panting, listening. Nothing. Just the wind. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath. Then in the distance, barely audible over the wind, a whistle, closer than before. We took off running again. By some miracle, we found our way back to the truck. We didn't look back. We peeled out of there, driving faster than we ever had in our lives. It wasn't until we got home that we realized something chilling. Neither of us had told anyone exactly where we were going. So how did they find us? And why were they waiting? I've always believed that the deeper you go into the wilderness, the safer you are from people. Animals, sure, but people, they don't stray too far from civilization. That's what I used to think. Last fall, my girlfriend Emily and I decided to go on a 3-day camping trip in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. We wanted real seclusion, miles away from any other campers or hikers. We found the perfect spot, a small clearing near a river, surrounded by dense woods. The first day was perfect. We set up camp, fished, cooked by the fire. It felt like we had the entire world to ourselves. But that night, everything changed. It started with a noise, not an animal, not the wind. It was laughter, distant, echoing through the trees, faint but unmistakably human. I sat up in my sleeping bag, straining to listen. Emily stirred next to me. "Did you hear that?" she mumbled. I nodded. "Someone's out there." She blinked sleepily. "Maybe other campers." I didn't think so. We had hiked nearly 7 miles off trail. There shouldn't have been anyone this deep in the woods. The laughter faded, replaced by silence. I convinced myself it was nothing, just my imagination, and eventually drifted back to sleep. But the next morning I found something that made my stomach twist. Footprints, not ours. Fresh, deep prints circling our tent. Someone had been watching us. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't want to scare her. I brushed it off, said we should move camp further up the river. She didn't argue. We packed quickly and hiked another 2 miles before setting up a new campsite. The second night, I barely slept. I kept the fire burning longer than usual, listening, waiting. At some point, exhaustion took over and I must have dozed off. Then, just like the night before, laughter. But this time it was closer. Emily sat bolt upright. "That's not normal." I grabbed my flashlight and shined it towards the trees. Nothing, just darkness. But I could feel it. Something was there, watching. Then a voice, software whimsical. "You moved." Emily's grip tightened on my arm. "What the hell?" I jumped up, shining the light frantically. My heart was slamming against my ribs. Nothing. Silence. Then, the worst part. A rustling sound just outside the glow of our fire. A slow, deliberate scraping, like someone running a knife along bark. I wasn't going to wait and see who or what it was. "Pack up, now," I whispered. We shoved our gear into our packs in record time, ditching the tent. I kept the flashlight sweeping back and forth as we hiked through the dark forest, barely breathing. And then I made the mistake of looking back. Just beyond the firelight, a figure stood between the trees. Tall, unmoving, watching. As soon as my light hit it, it stepped back, melting into the darkness. We ran. I don't know how long we hiked before we finally reached the car. The whole time I felt it. The sensation of being followed. When we got inside and locked the doors, I exhaled, shaking. Emily just stared straight ahead, gripping the wheel. Then she whispered something that still haunts me. They weren't alone. I turned to her, confused. She was staring at the tree line. I followed her gaze. And that's when I saw them. Not one, not two, but 3 figures, standing perfectly still at the edge of the woods, just watching. We peeled out of there and never looked back. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know why they were out there, but I know one thing for certain. Somewhere deep in those mountains, someone or something was waiting for us. And they weren't alone.